Welcome. It is so good to see all of you. Welcome to this live edition of Political Breakfast. We've had an opportunity to mingle with so many of you, and we just want to say thank you. Thank you for supporting what we do, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to the guys for them to say hello to you, and then we're going to kick off the conversation and keep it civil. Keep it civil, but also informative for you all. So, Brian, I'll begin with you.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. I just want to reiterate what Lisa said. Thank y'all so much for being listeners and for supporting the show. It is a labor of love for all of us. And we're now in our 10th year, which is absolutely incredible, right?
Again, as Brian mentioned, thank you all so much for being here this evening, and thank you all. I didn't realize it had been 10 years. Just a quick story. Brian and I met in 2015, I guess, and I know him through reputation. He knew me through reputation, and I had actually just come off the Obama campaign and was trying to make a living. And if you guys follow Governor Deal, Brian Robinson was always the person that was, pushing back in a respectful way, but sometimes aggressive way for his boss. But no, he came to me one day, a guy named Blake Ashby said, "Hey, Brian Robinson wants to go to lunch with you." And I was like, "Okay, what does this guy want to go to lunch with me about?" Because, we're not doing any business together and with the governor. But Brian had the idea. He said, "Look, what do you think about going to lunch and having a conversation with Dennis O'Hare? Because we believe that there's a need for a civil discussion between a Democrat and Republican. And I believe that you're the best Democrat in the world." No, he didn't say that. But that's essentially how we got to know each other. And then WABE, as always, thank you all so much for doing this. And let's give it up for this amazing facility, the Sesame Street for Puppetry Arts. I am so embarrassed. I've never been here before. I think the young lady that's escorted me said they've been here 46 years. So, Brian, as I think I know everything about Atlanta, I didn't know about this.
Well, here's how I found out about the center. I had been on the Hill, and I came back in 2010 to do Governor Deal's first campaign. And when he came into office, there were 3 days of operating funds in the state treasury because we were in the depths of the Great Recession, 12% unemployment. Y'all remember all the foreclosure signs. It was devastating. Many schools were going 4 days a week. And somebody cut the funding for the Center for Puppetry Arts. And it's the only time in my political career where I've had to go against protesting puppets who came to the Capitol to protest the cuts to this building. So I'm glad we survived it. Glad to be here.
Well, I used to bring my kids here. My son and my daughter are 23 and 24 now. And I walked in here. I was just amazed walking around like, gosh, I was reminiscing, It's a feel-good, almost like Disney, right? When you go back and you feel you can escape the world.
And when you see how tall Lisa is in person, you understand how her son is an offensive lineman.
A whole lot taller and bigger. Well, we're going to jump off with the conversation. You see how civil and friendly these two guys are? I get asked, they get asked all the time, do they really like each other? Because sometimes it gets a little tense, but it doesn't get disrespectful, right? And so I was talking to a man out there, Tharon and Brian, and they said, when will all of politics get back to the basics of just being civil and just to the basics of you have an opinion and I have opinion, and somehow we could just meet in common ground? Is that possible?
So, no. And I try to be, optimistic. If you guys hear me, I'm always trying to find the good in everything. But unfortunately, Lisa, it's about winning. And losing has consequences. And I think a lot of us, I talked to you all in the back room, we were talking about, will things ever get back to same? I think someone was telling me, is it really like Republicans don't understand how bad this is? And I think, honestly, we as Democrats, we got to get out of our echo chamber and just only talking amongst ourselves and realize, Lisa, that the world has shown us now multiple times that they are willing to vote for someone if it's going to bring them the change that they want. And so, no, I think that the media is definitely going to continue to report the good, the bad, and the ugly. Brian and I have a role to play because we try to be civil and we try to talk about the facts and what's going on. And then the last thing is, Lisa, listen, the electorate right now is a very quiet, aggressive group of voters. They don't tell us as much what they're thinking until Election Day. The polls have been right, the polls have been wrong. And so I just truly believe that one thing I know for sure, Democrats, we want a fighter, but we also want to win. I think Republicans want to fight. They want to continue winning. And I think that clearly polling must be showing them that all these cuts, which I'm sure we're going to get into later on, and this destruction and dysfunction is something that's working for their base. We got to figure out how do we rebuild that coalition that we built in 2020, and how do we start talking amongst ourselves? But the trick here, Lisa, is dealing with a lot of the issues that matter to most of us. Like, we're not going to agree with everybody in our party anymore, and I think we got to evolve. What I'm learning is that the people who are very confident and very passionate about some of those issues that have united us in the past, they'll forgive you if you have to be a little bit more moderate on it, but you got to make sure that you don't make them feel like you're abandoning what we truly are as Democrats. But listen, Lisa, the gloves are coming off. I'm being nice today, but y'all check back with me in about 90 days. Once we have all of our people kind of in the gubernatorial race, and then this conversation we're about to have in Georgia about who our nominees should be, it's going to get really, really, really testy. So just bear with us, okay?
I don't disagree with one thing he said. It's not because of a commitment to civility. He's just right. The answer is no. And the thing is, there are many reasons for it. We can talk about the media distillation, everybody getting their own facts from their preferred media outlets, to the point where we're talking about different things. It's not just about not sharing common facts. That's important. But if you go listen to MSNBC primetime and then go watch Fox News primetime, it's not a matter of saying different facts. They're talking about different topics completely. Like, if you go and talk to somebody who's an MSNBC viewer and you go and talk to them about something that's hot on the right, they have no idea what you're talking about. And if you get your news from like the New York Times, for example, and I do, I try to read a broad array, then you're not going to know what conservatives are talking about. It's a completely different take on things. And so until we get out of those sectors, that's not going to change. But I'll say this: if Americans don't like it, only they can change it. And what I see, and I'm a political consultant, and it's not my job it's not Tharon's job to make America better. It's our job to win. Nobody hires us to fix the country. All that we can do in our roles is help somebody win. And so what we do as consultants is give them advice on what gets you to 50% plus one. And being divisive, owning the other side, that's what voters respond to. So if voters don't want it, they got to vote for the nice person in the race. If you think Congress is broken, and it is, it's because we go and elect the people who say, I will never compromise. That is who we vote for in primaries. That is what we get.
Well, with that said, let's talk about what's happening in Washington, the people we send to Washington. It seems like gone are the days where the local politics ruled the day, and we talked about local politics around the water fountain, right? Now everything is trickling down from Washington. And I don't know, how many of you are a little uneasy about how you feel about America right now? You feeling good about it? How do you address that? How do you address what's going on in Washington and just how it's ruling what we do here in Atlanta on a day-to-day basis, really?
Well, I have to go back to what I said at our other live event. I think a few of you all were there. You may remember I said this bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump was going to last a few months. I think I maybe predicted it was going to last 100 days, right? I said that. Thank you, Brian. Just want to be factual.
I remember. Yeah.
And we see that the bromance actually, ended okay. But now Elon Musk is saying he disagreed with some of the things that Trump was doing. So I think what's happened, Lisa, is that we all had to know that things were going to be different. One of the things that we talked about on the Political Breakfast podcast is that Trump was going to be able to govern differently because he's not going to make some of the same mistakes he made before. I actually think he's worse this time around because the cuts and the American people are feeling it. The challenge here is that you're right. Gone are the days where your member of Congress, he or she, would go to Washington and say, hey, I want to bring back stuff for Atlanta. I want to bring back the bacon, these programs for Dalton, Georgia. What do we used to call it? Earmarks, and we used to call it this. That's over. You're pretty much going to Washington on a Monday, and you're just bracing yourself for whatever is going to come out of the White House. And used to be able to depend on the judicial branch to bring some stability and to pause things. They're ignoring that now. So the biggest challenge that, I've talked to a few members of Congress, Lisa, is that they literally are bracing themselves every day for issues that are just whatever on the Republican agenda. And I know we're going to talk about this big, beautiful bill later, and all the stuff that's in there. But what is missing is that no one is really able to go and say, hey, I want to fight for farmers. Hey, I want to fight for rural hospitals. Hey, I want to make sure that we keep these manufacturing jobs in our state. You have to kind of wait in line and let the MAGA agenda sort of get out in front first, get those things done, and then maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to really put something in there that matters. Because, look, we've been dominated by this whole thing of whether or not the tariffs are going to work or not. All right? We spent, seriously, 30, 45 days. Okay, what is he doing? Okay, is he going to blink today? Is he going to blink tomorrow? Okay, maybe they're going to work. Oh, this economist said this is terrible. This is inflationary. And so I think, Lisa, hopefully, that while things are very dominated by Washington, it's our local mayors, our local county executives who are literally saying, we are bracing ourselves. We're cutting spending because we don't know what's going to happen in Washington. But I will remind you all, it's your local governments and your state governments who really honestly have a big deal influence on your daily lives. And so they're right now paralyzed. They don't know what to do.
Speaker Tip O'Neill, when I was growing up in the 80s, said all politics is local. And today it's the flip. All politics is national. And, when I was growing up and I first got into this business, the local media sector was vibrant. And people consume news about the state legislature and their county commission, their city councils. And that's part of why the WABE is such an important part of the ecosystem in Atlanta, because so much of that has disappeared. You can't get local news much anymore. And even people who are informed and plugged in today are as likely, if they still get a physical paper come to their doorstep, it's as likely to be the Wall Street Journal or New York Times as the AJC, right? And so we just aren't consuming so much what's happening here. And what happens at the General Assembly is hugely important to your lives. What Governor Kemp does in a day-to-day business is hugely important to your lives. And I really wish that there was a way for there to be a civic re-engagement with local politics, because that is where change is happening in America today. Change is happening in one place, and it's the one place that none of us are looking, right? It is happening. And if you are, whatever ideology you are, whatever you want, somewhere in this country that is happening. There's some General Assembly, some legislature that is doing it. We don't hear about it so much. We focus on the fight that's happening in Washington. And, one thing I would follow up with Tharon on as far as differences from the last time. When Trump got in there the last time, he was surrounded by establishment folks who were a barrier to him, and he figured that out at some juncture, and today he's got people who will carry out his agenda. So even if you sorely disagree with everything he's doing or some of what he's doing, he came in, said, I'm going to do this, and he's doing it. And one thing the Democrats have got to figure out within our constitutional construct is how to be the opposition party. I am not in the meeting halls where Tharon is. I'm not in those barbershop conversations. But what I see from the outside is Democrats being angry at elected Democrats for not fighting harder, and I don't know what that means, right? What are they wanting to do? Armed conflict? I mean, they can filibuster, they can go on MSNBC and talk to other liberals. What do you want them to do, right? Trump won the election, and I think the way to, if you don't like what he's doing, fight him in court. That's what we see groups doing, and some of them are having success in doing that. But Democrats in Congress, what they need to focus on isn't so much trying to stop Trump from doing what he's doing right now. They need to focus on 2026. I think that's the smart. And the problem the Democrats face right now is I don't know what their unified agenda is. I don't know what their unified vision is, other than I hate Trump, right? And that worked for them in 2016. In 2018. I hate Trump. They won in 2018. I don't know that that's going to work this time. They've got to have a vision, and they've got to have a commonality beyond a universal hatred of Trump.
Do Democrats have that figured out? Is that true?
Yeah, so remember now, I am the Democrat who every single week goes on this podcast, and Lord knows if I miss, Lisa and Brian start talking about what exotic island I may be on. But
because he is.
Every single week, if you guys listen to what I've been saying, especially at the last live event, this is a process, all right? It's to me broken down in quarters, right? So for those of us who know football, there's a power and there's a finesse game, right? That's why you see these college teams getting the big running backs, and they bring in a little scat backs, third downs, that can throw the ball. So right now, what we tried as Democrats, we were using the big tailback, right? He or she is probably 250 pounds, and we're just trying to let the American people know that this guy's bad, the country is heading in the wrong direction, this is messed up. Guys, the country knows that. So now what we got to do is we got to remix it a little bit. We got to tell people what's wrong with Trump, but we also got to tell people what can be different for them, all right? And the decisions that he is making, and not just him, everyone in Congress who are voting with him are not preparing you for what's in store. It's not preparing you for what's ahead. Now, the challenge with that, Lisa, is that let's not act like we don't live in a city right now that has a huge issue with wage inequality, wage stagnation. Women are still not being paid as much as men. We have the homelessness problem here in Atlanta. And I love Mayor Dickens, so there's no shade to him. So we act like in Atlanta that we live in this utopia, but we really don't. We have a transit problem, right? Young people are trying to figure out, why in the hell do I have to continue to buy these expensive cars and tariffs? Why can't I have a transit system that gets me from North Georgia to Middle Georgia, right? We also have an conversation here, and I'm just going to say it, Brian, because I'm trying to win more votes. Hell, we need to go ahead and figure out a way to legalize marijuana here, right? And let's put more people on a medical marijuana registry. I know B-Rob is about to be like, where did this come from? But I've been studying the polling too. Because you know what we've been trying to do as Democrats, guys? We've been trying to be too perfect. I mean,
Who said that?
and let me, and I see Sent back there, who's known me for a long time, who know where I grew up, and it's funny.
But what does that mean? What does that mean, Tharon?
What?
Try to be too perfect. What does that mean?
So before, it really didn't start with Donald Trump, but you got to remember, Democrats, we got spoiled. Who did we elect in 2008? I just watched this Netflix special. How many of y'all watched the Netflix special about when we decided to Osama bin Laden, and it was like a 4-part episode. Have y'all watched that? Okay, only one person? Oh, y'all need to go watch it. So who's the person, you have to be reminded, who's the person who actually, after 10 years, was the person who killed Osama bin Laden? It was Barack Obama. All right, no shade to Bush. Bush definitely did everything he possibly could. He tried. So, Lisa, what happened in 2008, it took a perfect black man who has a white mama and a daddy from Kenya, who he barely knew, who was raised by a white grandmother from Hawaii, and came in. It was like the perfect storm for Democrats. And the only thing they could criticize him on was that he wore a tan suit in the White House. That was it. That was it. I mean,
Other than that, perfect.
And my good friend Killer Mike, who's a dear friend of mine, if he was sitting here right now, he would try to make a legitimate argument that Barack Obama could have done more for black people. And he and I had that debate privately. So we had him, and then boom, out of nowhere, we put Hillary Clinton up. And she kind of was a little different, but kind of more the same establishment. And what the Republicans did, they stopped trying to be perfect. Because think about who their perfect candidate was. It was John McCain. I mean, you don't get any more American than John McCain. But the guy who criticized him, who basically questioned that whether he was a war hero or not, was this gentleman over here in New York making all this money, running these businesses into the ground, doing reality TV shows. And he came and he ran in a primary and crushed everybody. So I'm not saying we need a Donald Trump like person. I think there's only one Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump did show us is that he went against the establishment in 2016. He wasn't perfect. He was raw. He was honest. And what do people tell me in my focus groups, B-Rob? I don't like what he says, but I do want someone who basically believes in what they say, someone who's at least very passionate about what they're doing. And he shows aggression and strength. So we got to figure out who's the man or woman on our side that can pick up that mantle, pick up that baton. Because, and let me respond to something real quick that B-Rob said. Yes, fighting Trump is a part of the equation. But the problem is, if you come out here with these solutions and you want to talk about real issues, education, public safety, making sure that we have health care for our seniors, keeping rural hospitals open, it doesn't get reported on as much because Trump will basically just come out and say, hey, I'm thinking about pardoning P. Diddy. He used to be my friend. That is what gets covered, right? And so we got to figure out a way to create different methods of communications. But I would tell you this, no, the perfect candidate in the Democratic side, guys, when he or she presents themselves and it's a little raw and it's a little unorthodox, do what these Republicans are doing. Just say, oh, I love their policy. You know what, he or she says what that means, and I love their aggression. Because what we do as Democrats, we become a little too elitist, and we want our candidates to have all these qualifications, all this education, all this, they got to serve. Brian, I was talking about this, and I said it. I'm guilty. I said it backstage before he calls me out. This young lady said she's going to run for Congress. I'm like, damn, that's a big leap for her. And Brian's like, why not? She should do it, right?
Get out there and shake it up.
So we gotta get somebody in here that can shake it up. And I think that person is in the wing. I don't know who it is, but I do think they're out there.
Brian, dissect it from Governor Kemp's point of view, because we talk about on the podcast all the time how he's the perfect politician, isn't he? I mean, he appeals to everyone. He gets out there and he does it somehow. I don't know. Kind of flesh that out for us if you can.
He is in a unique situation. You got to realize in 2018 when he ran as the MAGA candidate within that primary, you'll recall the ad with the truck and the ad with the gun and the ad with the explosion going off in the background. And so that came out through the primary. And what Republicans saw, I talked to the Republican Governors Association in the wake of that. So they're doing focus groups in Metro Atlanta with white women, and Kemp's numbers were atrocious with that group, and it was all in response to those ads. And so you had this surging Democrat who had this national profile. She was raising money in a way that Democrats never have before in Georgia, and really haven't even since, even though Warnock's a pretty impressive fundraiser too, and squeaked it out by 55,000 votes. And I do think Stacey Abrams would have won, because that was a bad year for Republicans, right? That was a really bad year. Democrats went across the country, and really, truly, Democrats even surged in Georgia to get her to 55,000 votes. 4 years before, Nathan Deal had won by 200,000 votes. So that's a pretty big swing within a 4-year period, particularly when the state of Georgia was pretty happy with Nathan Deal. They were happy with Republican governance. So for her to get that close was remarkable. And, there was nothing in that first year that really changed that dynamic. And then Trump decided to blow him up. And throughout all of this time, he was passing an extraordinarily conservative agenda. You look at the heartbeat law, you look at constitutional carry, you look across the board, he has a rock-solid conservative record. But he codes as moderate with many independents and even some Democrats in the state because he took on Trump. And so it put him in this unicorn category where the Republican base who lives here accepts him because they like his record, because they know his record. And when Donald Trump told them it wasn't a good record, they didn't believe him. They were like, we love you, dude. We love you. We know who our guy is. We know. And he ended up being a Trump-endorsed candidate by 50 points in a primary. That's never been done in this country in the last 10 years. Everywhere else where Trump has weighed in, he has pretty much won. You look at the Arizona Senate candidate, the Pennsylvania Senate candidate. Trump picked losers who lost in the general. In Georgia, Republicans said, we love you, President Trump. We support what you did as president. We're going to stick with our guy. And then they went on to win by a huge margin in 2022 as a result. So he's a unicorn, and some of it is because of decisions that he has made, but he had this moment in history, and it's true for Brad Raffensperger as too, where they had to make a decision, and the country at large may have disagreed, the Republicans in the country at large may have disagreed with their decisions, but at the end of the day, a critical mass of Georgians were like, thank you for getting us through this, thank you for what you did. And no one, whoever our next governor is, they can't recreate that scenario, right, where that happened.
Timing is everything.
Kemp's brand here is as strong as any brand I've ever seen in Georgia, probably since like Sam Nunn's time. My boss, Nathan Dill, was beloved, but I would never say that our brand has reached what Kemp's has. Even with that, the guy who got the most votes in 2022 was Brad Raffensperger.
I think that the bravest decision that a politician has made in Georgia was for Governor Kemp to make a very, very calculated risk at a time where people were dying. We were going through a deadly pandemic. Seniors were basically in senior centers getting COVID-19. People were dying. People were going through. Hospitals were overwhelmed. I'm gonna set this up for y'all because we can't forget this. We had to wear masks. CDC was telling us this thing called social distancing, right? And I remember, shout out to Rob Pitts, chairman of Fulton County. Like many of you, I was on an all-out mission to get my mom, my godmother, and my mother-in-law their vaccine shots. All right, we remember that time, okay? He decided to keep the state open, and think about the jobs that he kept open. This is where I think we missed it. And Brian, yeah, I'm gonna give him a little credit. He used to say this, he was quoting those tattoo parlors and those barbershops and those beauty salons. I'm looking
the bowling alleys, we had to have those.
And then he was like, bowling. I'm thinking like, I know he ain't never been to no tattoo parlor, right? But what governor, and we cannot forget this, and I'm about to say this, and the governor is doing a good job, so I'm gonna say this, but Lisa, you remember this. He went on national TV, y'all remember this? And said that he did not know that you can catch COVID-19 if you were asymptomatic, right? Remember that? I mean, so he was the laughingstock. And what did American people say to us? Y'all got that country talking governor down there in Georgia who don't even know. But had COVID turned out differently, this would be a whole different conversation. But what Brian Kemp did, guys, and to Brian's point about leadership, it was a hard thing to do because we stayed open before Florida, and people flooded here, right? And it drove Keisha Lance Bottoms crazy. Think about it. I mean, where she really got into it with the governor, she was like, damn it, I'm trying to keep people alive and keep people safe, but the governor won't shut it down. If COVID-19, and we still got to remember this, guys, we had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who died in the state because of the decision, partly of what the governor did.
It wasn't hundreds of thousands. It was like maybe 1 million in the country.
No. But I'm saying in Georgia, we had, okay, how about this? Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were affected. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, how many people died in Georgia from the time that COVID-19 until the years? I mean, I want to say that it was hundreds of thousands of people.
We have 10 million people. It couldn't have been 100,000.
Okay. Anyway, let's say 50,000 people, right? It's still too much. I know it was over 50. And people are Googling it, right? So my point is, it was the difference between Democrats trying to show empathy and saying one life being lost is too many, and we need to do everything we can, whereas I think the governor made a business decision, and he kept the state open, and a lot of voters, particularly Democrats who were working, say, you know what, all right, I know we probably had some loved ones, some people who died, but I was able to keep my job. And the other thing we got to remember, guys, those parents who did not want their kids at home anymore, when he tried to get them back into school, that was something that I think that changed his trajectory as well.
It was a roll of the dice, and it played off big time. Yeah. And the first thing when Tharon and I talked about Keisha Lance Bottoms announcing for governor, the first thing I brought up on the show was Kemp went out there and opened the economy during COVID. She went on TV and attacked him vociferously, and it has not aged well, right? I mean, today Georgians have no doubt that Brian Kemp was right. I heard Pete Buttigieg last week saying one thing Democrats did wrong was keeping schools closed for so long. If you don't think that's true, I don't know what rock you have been under. The kids who were hurt the worst were the low-income kids, people who didn't have support at home. Those parents couldn't go back to work. It was a disaster. And I live in DeKalb County, and my little block of my neighborhood, half the kids are in the DeKalb County schools, half are in private schools. And I saw with those parents who are making a conscientious decision to have their kids in public schools, these are people who could afford to send their kids to private. They were there because they believe in public schools, and they lost faith in the leadership of public schools, and they've never recovered it.
You think that's going to haunt Keisha during her run for governor?
Absolutely. I will play that all day, every day, just like the video of Kamala that got aired all that time. Play it all day, every day. Remind people that when given the chance to lead, this is what she would have done. She would have kept us closed. That's not what you want. That's not the kind of leadership that we want in Georgia. And I'll say Jason Estevez, who's running, is a good friend of mine. Our kids go to school together, and we are in Leadership Georgia together. But he was chairman of the Atlanta School Board. And I was texting him going, why are y'all doing this? This is terrible policy, but they would not stand up to the teachers groups, and it has not aged well. I do think one thing that's going to benefit Democrats in 2026 is Americans are beginning to forget about that period.
We want to hear from you now. Krista Irwin, you had a question.
I am a nurse. Healthcare is very important to me. I kind of want to ask, how do you, as the Republican mantra, the Democrat mantra, how do you define what it means for healthcare to be a human right? Because I think that really plays into how the response was to COVID, to many other things, but especially COVID, and how quickly the working class was made to go back to work.
So thank you for your question, and thank you for attending these live events. And let me correct myself. Thank you so much. So we had 2.5 million cases. We had hundreds of thousands of people who were hospitalized, but we only had 36,000 deaths. So I stand corrected. That's what I got. But still, that's too many. But anyway, this was that. I think that, to me, first of all, thank you for what you do. I believe that being a teacher and being a nurse and then anybody in the health field is the most noble job one can have. I'm going to personalize this for a second, and I see my good friend Sent in the audience. And Sent, when we finish this, we're going to have to talk to Brian because he doesn't believe that I grew up in the projects in Athens. He likes to think where I am now is where I've always been. But this woman, her family lived right across the street from me, so she can vouch for me. Yeah.
We can outpour them, can't we, Mom and Dad? We live in a really poor neighborhood.
So I'm gonna personalize this for a second. It's not until something happens to you, you don't realize how hard healthcare is and how inaccessible it is in this state. Let me give you a personal moment. My mother's 80 years old. Sent knows my mother. My mother has survived breast cancer. My mother was just in a very, very bad car accident. Someone hit her, she drove into a tree, airbags deployed. Some of you in this room, I've been working with her trying to actually get her some help. No offense to St. Mary's, but coming out of getting breast cancer treatment, which we have to pay for because Medicaid and Medicare does not pay for it. And the private center we had to take her to in Athens because that was the best place. The health care doesn't pay for it. Fast forward, trying to actually figure out whether she qualifies for which Medicare Advantage plan has been tough. There's also such a shortage of nurses, particularly nurse practitioners, where we're on a waiting list, Lisa, to even have somebody that can come to her house to just give her home care. This is home care that's to help her get a bath, home care to help her walk around. Now, fortunately, my mama got 3 kids, and one of whom that's doing pretty well. And I can, put a little something on it, as Keisha would say, right? But the hospitals, you all, if you ever have a little spare time, go and sit in an emergency room. It is horrific. The level of prioritization that unless you are about to die, and I'm not, Grady, shout out to Grady, but go to Emory, go to Piedmont. If you are like breathing and kind of living, you're going to be there for a while. And it's a confluence of lack of resources, confluence of not enough doctors and nurses, and we live in a very unhealthy America. So I think what we got to talk about is also Medicaid expansion. And this is what I've been saying. Before we start talking about expanding Medicaid, we got to talk about how we can protect it. And what's going on in Washington right now, no matter how Republicans try to spin it, they're trying to take away Medicaid and Medicare. Now, they say they're going to preserve it, but they're trying to take it away. So I start off by personalizing the story with my mom, because if she did not have 3 children, 2 of whom are doing pretty well, no offense to my sister, she's trying. She got 5 kids. You know, she's living off me right now, right? My mom would not be able to get the proper health care she deserves to recoup. And guys, there's literally hundreds, and I do know this status, right? We got about 300 to 400,000 people that's in that gap. And we have kids out here in this state that don't have access to health care and the food as well. So I think that's how we got to talk about it. And newsflash, it's not all black people. It's white people. It's rural people. And guess what, y'all? My mama would say she was middle class when she was working. And it's some rich people that are going through this, but they just don't talk about it as much. So what Democrats have got to do, we can't let Republicans say, oh, it's just helping out the least of these. No, it's people who need it the most. And I've been doing my research. A lot of people who are on Medicaid are people who are white in rural areas.
And they work. Yeah,
and they're working class Georgians. They work every day, y'all. So that's why we got to, and I think Brian is going to chime in on that. So Lisa, so that's, to answer your question, I think that, to me, the closing of these hospitals has been detrimental. People now have to drive 10, 12, 15 miles to go to a hospital. And then lastly, Lisa, I'm going to say this, maternal mortality is real. Georgia ranks the worst when it comes to women and men, by the way. We go through maternal mortality, but particularly African-American women in the nation.
I want to say, I want to point something out here. We talking about Medicare and Medicaid. The father of the director of Medicaid and Medicare services is here. Scott Johnson, his son Andrew Johnson is the head of the CMS in Washington. So he is literally at the table dealing with these major healthcare decisions.
And at the Capitol. I see him at the Capitol all the time.
Oh, yeah. I love Scott Johnson because he was an early Nathan Deal supporter in 2010, back when there weren't many of us. So God bless you forever. As I was driving in today with my parents, we were talking about the Maha stuff, right? We were talking about the processed foods and the dyes in our foods and the stuff that makes us unhealthy, and the brokenness of our healthcare system. And I think that's something you see HHS really focused on, is wellness. And I think we have a lot in this era of looking for common ground, which we've been talking about here. This is one where there's common ground. We are a sick country, and our healthcare treats sickness instead of promoting wellness. And, who am I to judge? I mean, I have what doctors call a weight problem. That's the Chris Farley joke. So every time I go to the doctor, I'm like, Brian, you really need to lose some weight. Yeah, I got you, doc. I got next year. So I'm not casting stones on the unhealthiness of America. I'll probably exemplify it. I love processed foods. As Nate Burke-Gassey says, my food is farm factory table. Right? Yeah. The thing I'm most jealous of for in the White House is Trump's Diet Coke button. I would love to have one of those. So I think we have to have a restructuring of how Americans live. And I'll tell you one thing. Here's the controversial thing that I'll put onto it. And I'm sure this is something that Andrew Johnson has to deal with a lot. Most Medicare expenses occur in the last 6 months of an American's life in their latter years. And I think that given the advances of medicine that allow people to live far beyond what they used to live with similar conditions is something that we're going to have what Tharon calls an uncomfortable conversation about. At what juncture do taxpayers no longer have a responsibility for someone who's on Medicare and is in those and has ended their useful life, or their whatever the appropriate term for that would be? I don't want to be hurtful, but it is extremely expensive to keep people alive when a lot of them would probably like to be left to let nature take its course. Again, people look at me funny when I talk about this, but it's just economics. And if we want to make sure that Tharon's mom, that we have the resources to get her that home health care, we have to make decisions. And as far as it being a human right, that gets tricky too, because we still have to make those decisions. No matter what, there is a pie of services out there, and we have to distribute it as fairly as we possibly can. And you can't do that without hard, and in some cases, heartbreaking decisions. And I think we have to be honest about that. Medicare and Medicaid is unsustainable. I turn the age where you get those services at the time that the federal government says they're going to go bankrupt, right? Lucky me. And for those of you, like my friend VJ back there, who are young Gen Zs, forget about it. You guys shouldn't vote for anybody who says they're going to leave entitlements unchanged. Both parties. Y'all should reject both parties. You should demand that they change entitlements. There's no excuse in people being on a federal program for a third of their lives, which is what happens if you retire at 62 and live to 92, right? We cannot afford that. And millennials, Gen Zs, and really Xs like me should demand change, because this is absurd. So you want to help the people who need help? Let's free up that money.
Scott Johnson.
Be an education policy kind of person in my background here. I'll ask about, you mentioned COVID, and there was something that COVID really did open a lot of people's eyes to, was some opportunities in our education system. As you said, we're a local control state, and a lot of our districts stayed open more than others. But what we're seeing in Georgia now, and seeing in the country, is a trend toward parental choice for schools. I saw just yesterday a documentary of African-American mom who is homeschooling, using the Promise Scholarship to homeschool her children, in her two children in Macon. So do you think we're going to see more of things like the Opportunity Promise Scholarship, expand it? Now it's to the lowest 20, if your students attend in the lowest 25% of schools. But is it is parental choice for educating children going to grow, and what's going to be the effect of that?
Well, listeners of the show know I am a passionate advocate of empowering parents, because nobody knows what your kids need more than you. And Scott is somebody who has been a leader in this state, and I want to praise you for this, when it comes to making sure that kids with dyslexia are screened in public schools and they get the resources that they need. I'm a father of a dyslexic kid. He's the grandfather of dyslexic kids. It's a passion project for me. I want to make sure that every parent who faces that dilemma is able to get the help that they need. So thank you so much for what you've done on that. And I think empowering parents is going to be a huge part of how we go forward. If you put a kid in a low-performing school and that kid's got parents at home who read to them and look out for their interests, that kid's going to be okay. It's the kids who don't have that at home that are in the most trouble. But if you're in a school that's failing, you should have the ability to do something else. You shouldn't have to go to some place that's violent, some place where no one graduates, where no one's reading at grade level. If you were a parent, you shouldn't be trapped because of where you can afford to live. And I want to see those people have other opportunities. Here is the secret to it. We've seen the expansion in Florida, and here's what's happened. The people who are trapped in failing schools are over-indexed minorities, black and brown children, right? What happens once those parents are empowered and they're able to put their kids somewhere else? Those people become the fiercest advocates for the Promise Scholarship, because they don't want to lose it, because they see what it's doing for their kids. So I want to see this, what we have, which is very modest. It is far below what advocates want to see. But it's a test. And once we see parents start getting that money coming in, and we start seeing them get results, that's going to be, and if it works, we need to expand it, period, full stop. If it works, we need to expand it so that more families have that opportunity.
Who funds the scholarship here that you're referring to?
Taxpayers.
Taxpayers, all right. So we pay into it, all right. How much money is in it, like this year, or how much have they raised?
It funds about 20,000 students.
Must be a client of Brian's. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
No, I'm very passionate about it.
Okay.
It funds about 20,000 students this year,
Okay.
and it's $6,500 per scholarship.
Got it. Okay. So it all sounds great, and I'm gonna say this: I'm a big believer in parental choice as well, but you got to be realistic about it. All right, here we go. I'm using myself as an example, right? Got to credit. When I was growing up in Athens, I went to school wherever my mother could afford to live. Period. Let me say that again. I grew up and I went to school wherever my mother could afford to live. My mother was not giving a choice to send me anywhere else, so I had to go to that public school. Do I believe that my mother would have sent me to a better school had she known about this scholarship? Maybe, right? But the truth of the matter is, now it's a paradigm that I'm breaking. So now I made a decision to send my kid, as you and I talked about, to the Atlanta Speech School. I'm paying a lot of money, right? Do I believe my son could be getting the same education at public schools? Yes. But it's what you and I talked about. It's about being able to have the means to send your child to a school for early detection, where they may be dyslexic, they may have a problem with language, literacy. And the truth of the matter is that we live in a state that has not prioritized public education, which can work if you fully fund it, if you support our teachers, and you make sure that they have all the resources they need. So here's my question just about this. Let's not weaponize parental responsibility or choice. We're not going to even have a conversation about vouchers. But I think you can do both. I think you can give parents a choice, but spend more time on giving those parents who don't have a choice to live where they have to live, work where they have to work, and empower the public schools, because to me, that's going to be a long-term, more systemic solution. And at the Atlanta Speech School, we raise money. There are kids that go to school with Tyson who I'm sure are there on a scholarship, right? But there are a lot of parents out there that can afford to do it. I'm just always going to be a big advocate of public schools and public school teachers, because when you take those children out of those schools, they like to say that the money follows them, but it doesn't always follow them, right? You're taking kids away, and you're not supplementing the schools with the funding they need to be able to educate. And that's my biggest problem with weaponizing this whole parental choice thing, because there are a lot of people in Atlanta who cannot choose where their kid have to go to school. And I do think that when you look at the violence that we see on television in these public schools, and we have teachers that are retiring, I think we need to pay them more. I think we need to keep them open. APS right now is about to close schools. It's just happening, guys. And so, and K through 12 right now is suffering. So that's my response to it. But the work that you do is very honorable. But I'm always going to err on the side of, can we do more with public schools before we start trying to take kids out of public schools and send them somewhere else?
Maria Alvarez.
Thank you. My question is more like, it comes from the fact I was born in Nicaragua, and we had to leave. There was a revolution there and stuff like that, and we saw like I have seen the uprise of a dictator, and my concern comes from what I see happening, and you guys said it at the very beginning. The senators and everybody is waiting for what comes from above. And that, to me, that kind of like makes me a little, feel a little freaked out, because, it's like, that, to me, it resonates with a dictatorship, with authoritarianism, right? So that, to me, has me really concerned that comes from both of you. Something like that, especially with what's happening with the funding of education, with people, Latin Americans, but even people that are here with a legal visa or whatever, that are literally being picked up. She could be picked up. She's a U.S. person, she actually was born here. But I could be picked up from the side of the road. I'm a naturalized citizen. And so that's a big concern. And it's not even that I want you all to focus on. That's not my question. My question is, how can you reassure the Americans, everybody that lives in this country, not people just like people like me, but anybody, that we are not in a path to a authoritarianism, a dictatorship, kind of like Hitler. I'm going to say it, like Hitler. How can you reassure me that that is not going to occur?
I'll be quick. I can't guarantee you that. Look, I'm not going to go as far as to say that we are living with a dictator and authoritarian government. However, what concerns me most is the silence of the people who is affecting and the people it's not affecting. There should be more outrage in this country about what's happening. But I do think that Trump tapped into a long systemic emotion of people, quote unquote, wanted their country back. And we can have a long conversation about which country they're referring to. I'm not going to assure you that it's going to get better. I actually going to be honest with you, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
This is something that concerns me, but here's the thing, though. I don't want to just have this from the MSNBC perspective here, because Republicans are going to say this. Like, the Supreme Court told Joe Biden, no, you can't just unilaterally cancel college loan debts. So he was like, okay, I'll do it anyway. He was not in good shape to run for re-election. We now know they were hiding prostate cancer in addition to what was severe mental and physical decline that we all saw right here in Atlanta, right across the road in June 1 year ago this month. And you're talking about waiting from the word from above? There was one Democrat who stood up and said, this is not okay. We've got to have another option. You know what his name was? It was Dean Phillips. He was a congressman who ran against Joe Biden, and he was destroyed by Democrats. He was universally pilloried and driven out of the party. And guess what? He was right. He was telling the truth. And so Democrats can sit here and say the Republicans are just waiting from word from their dear leader. And look, I think there's probably a sliver of truth to that. But Democrats did the same thing. They refused to look reality in the face with a president who was in decline and had no business running for re-election. And so I think a lot of this navel-gazing that we're seeing from Democrats right now is because they acknowledge that Biden should have been forced out earlier. Someone else from a new generation should have been allowed to run and make a go for it in a competitive primary. And they didn't do it. And, so there's some of this on both sides where there's no speaking truth to power internally.
I'm just trying to understand, though, how does trying to forgive student loan debt for many people compare to what's...
I'm happy to answer that.
It is literally rounding up people who allegedly make a illegal right turn and you pull them over and mistakenly... I'm just trying to understand, how do you compare student loan debt forgiveness to what the Trump administration is doing?
It has to do with the rule of law. It has to do with the constitutional system. The Supreme Court said you can't do this, and Biden said, I'm going to do it anyway. That is abrogating the rule of law, and that is taking apart these guardrails that I keep hearing Democrats talk about these days. As far as what's happening in Dalton, that is certainly a heartbreaking story. But again, where is it different? That, too, is the rule of law. We have a law on the books that says if you are not here legally, if you're not here on a visa, you're not a citizen, you don't have permission from the U.S. government, then you are here illegally. And so what Trump he promised that he would stop the flow of illegal immigration into this country, and he's doing it.
You all are familiar with that case, Ximena Arias Cristobal. Yeah, it sparked a lot of controversy, a lot of anger, and we just happened to have her on Morning Edition today, and she was just talking about the fact that, yes, she's undocumented, but still has hopes and dreams of, being here in America. We probably have time for 2 more questions, if you promise to be short and sweet. Dorothy Travasos.
Hi, I just wanted to say real quick, I really appreciate this podcast. I'm from a state where this type of discourse doesn't happen quite as much, so I'm very appreciative to be able to be here with all of you. My question is, what issue, I know everything is political, but what issue that is not specifically part of politics do you think is most consequential for Georgians right now?
I think all the issues are political.
Yeah, everything's political. That's true. I mean, other than I want the Dogs to win the national championship this year.
I would say the one thing that concerns me that we've talked about it, but we haven't talked about it from this point of view. So we talk about DEI. John Hope Bryant, you should follow this guy. He's a fellow CAU board member of mine, and he talks about how the country is getting browner and browner every single day, and that while Republicans are trying to do away with DEI and corporations are having to change the way they talk about it, I think that we're going to run into a really big issue around workforce in this country. And what I mean by that is that, as you all mentioned, I'll say what you said, not only is the Trump administration deporting people who are here undocumented and unlawfully, but they're actually trying to transport people who are here legally as well. So I just think that, to me, the ability to have a trained workforce with rising tuition costs and not as many people being able to go to school and graduate, I just think that when our people who we're fighting with these tariffs, they're getting better and better and stronger, and I think our workforce and DEI efforts are getting weaker and weaker, and I think that in maybe 50 years or so, we actually may have a huge problem of having a well-trained workforce in this country. Because we literally are cherry-picking who should have what job based on their race and gender and their sexual orientation. I think that's something that should be talked about a lot as far as, like, what are we doing? And to John Hope Bryant's point, the GDP won't support us not having people here in America that can do these jobs if you're trying to keep them here.
I do agree with Tharon that everything is political. Anything that you look at a challenge, there's going to be some policy around it, some discussion around it that is political, and that we begin to form in our groups about how we approach it. But I think one of the biggest challenge, obviously, I'm not an expert on this, but I think what we got to figure out in our education system in the very near future is how we train kids in dealing with AI. Obviously, that's going to change what career trajectory they have, what careers they can have, which careers become obsolete, which I think is going to happen. So that's one thing that, even beyond kids, what does that mean for people who are in the workforce now? You know, will your job become obsolete? And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges of the next generation. Hey, and maybe it'll deliver utopia. Who knows, right? We can all just live in our own alternate reality and cut off the real world completely. That's what I kind of fear might happen.
Cooper, take us out on a high note, Cooper.
Brian, Tharon, Lisa, thank you so much. I love listening to your guys' podcast. Brian, I just want you to remember that I said something positive about you before I ask my question. So my name is Cooper O'Brien. I'm a kid with ADHD, growing up in the school system, and I do tax work at a Big Four firm. And one of the things that's really kind of bothering me right now in the political environment is the lack of sourcing, especially when you have like MAHA putting out reports with AI and the citations are fake. And if I was to do that with my own job, I'd probably get fired. So outside of that, though, with the big, beautiful bill and everything that's kind of going on right now, why don't Republicans just kind of own up to what is in the bill, and that the fact that there are things like moving the ability for tariffs to the President of the United States so that he can actually impose tariffs when that's actually a part of Congress's role, and that there are court cases that are going around right now where the Supreme Court is saying to the President of the United States so many times, you need to stop doing something, and when Joe Biden got told to stop doing something, he may have looked for an alternative path on one issue, but there's probably like 10, 15 items where the Supreme Court's ruling on this And it's actually just recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had this case. So that's my question on the Republican side, but then on the Democratic side, and Tharon, I just want you to remember, I said something nice about you too. Why don't Democrats really take the sourcing side and speak more about it and kind of fact check live?
Again, back to the difference between Joe Biden pushing forward with student loan debt forgiveness, and you're right, he did do that, and there were some other things that he at least allowed the Supreme Court to come back and rule on. The difference with this president is that the Supreme Court is saying no, 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 and he's still moving forward with it. I think that the biggest challenge that federal Democrats are trying to figure out now is how do you bring a level of humanization to push back on what's in this big, beautiful bill. You have our leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who's literally sitting on the steps of the Capitol for 36 hours, I think it was, maybe 30 hours, having conversations with real people, teachers, medical people. Cory Booker trying to go to the well and filibuster and break the record for Strom Thurmond. So there's things that we're trying to do. The other thing is the town halls, right? I think they're effective, but the only thing the media wants to talk about are the people who are telling John Ossoff and Warnock, we need you to do more, but they don't really get into the actual systemic progress that's being made at these town hall meetings. So it's one of these things where we're trying to figure out how do we get real people, real cases, and amplify it to show that the negative impact that could be brought to the American people by this bill. The other thing is, look, I mean, Trump is defiant. I mean, he wants to put stuff in the bill that's going to help millionaires and billionaires and corporations. And some of these corporations I work for, like some of these people I represent. But I think even they will tell you that they want the tax break, but they also want to figure out, okay, is there a way for us to pay our fair share and make sure that we can move forward and together. So I also just want to warn you guys, it's June 2nd. We got some time. Like, Democrats are not going to get it right away. We got to do more listening. And we got to make sure that we try to get some wins on the board. And I think the best way to push back on this movement is to win elections and to really try to trust the American people that they're going to see the difference.
You know, the thing about the fact checking is that Republicans, and for good reasons historically, have no faith in a media fact check. And I can tell you, I was a communications director for a Republican, and the idiotic fact checks that I would face, to this day, I'll Google myself sometimes because I know I've talked to a reporter, I'm trying to find the story to see what I said, see what they used, and I'll find some fact check literally from 2010 where I got a pants on fire for saying something that to this day I tell you was true. So Republicans know that the media fact check has a liberal bias because there's a bunch of liberals sitting around making these determinations based on how liberals view a certain topic. So there should be some facts that we can all agree on. Conservatives are not going to believe anything done by a non-conservative organization because they've been taught to not believe anything because they've proven that they don't see the world the way that we do. And that's just how it is. And, you know, as far as the big, beautiful bill and how big it is, I would much rather a lot of that stuff get chopped up, but it reflects the reality that Congress is broken, that you can't chop it up and get it all passed. You just can't do it. You can only do one thing. For Joe Biden, it was Build Back Better, where it had some juncture been the Green New Deal, and so they packed a bunch of garbage in there that Republicans hate. And I can tell you, I bet you Republicans think a lot of what we were told about that bill was a lie from their perspective. And to your fact check and why Democrats aren't doing it, look, this kind of gets back to where we started. There is no place for any member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, to go and do that fact check or try to educate the American public because there's not a platform that reaches the American public. There's not one, right? You can't go to Walter Cronkite and meet half of the nation anymore. There's no pathway to do it. And it's going to be a problem for Republicans when we're in the minority, and there's going to be a political churn at some juncture. And so we're going to see more and more distillated media, more and more distillated perception of facts.
I want to say this. It's not that we're not fact-checking. We are. And I don't want to beat up on the media, but we also got to call balls and strikes. We have a president right now who is attacking the media. I mean, Brian just laid it out. He wants everybody to believe that every news outlet is fake news. And we need more journalists and media outlets to speak up, because he's also trying to take away the First Amendment rights. The last thing is that the other thing that every media outlet is trying to figure out right now is, how do we reach more people? I think it's through this. But the last thing I'll say is this, guys. The thing that worries me the most is how desensitized we have become in this country, and we don't hold our politicians to the same standard that we used to. We allowed Donald Trump and any Republican, many of whom used to talk bad about him, now they all want to get in line and be his friend. We let them get away with it. And we just got to figure out, how do we fight back, and hopefully, just like in 2020, we have enough people who will say, okay, you know what, enough is enough. We got to go in a different direction in 26 and a different direction in 28.
And I'll say on Trump, he won a popular vote in this country, and you Democrats talk about how stupid he is, how mean he is, how corrupt he is. He won. So Democrats need to probably go and do some self-reflection on what the world happened. If he's so terrible, how are we not able to win this election?
On that note, stay tuned. 2026 is on the way, and we have a lot more talking to do. I think it was Elon Musk who said that bill is either big or beautiful. It can't be both, so we'll see how that turns out as well. But we want to thank you all so much for joining us for this edition of a live edition of Political Breakfast. We appreciate you, and just thank you so much for your support.